Now, before we start with the session on mobilizing higher tax revenues for financing India's development here in the Crystal Ballroom, I have a few very important announcements to make. There is going to be a sort of an overlap. There are going to be parallel sessions. 4:30 p.m. we have a session on establishing India's leadership in the digital economy of the future in the Regal Room on the first floor. And that will be graced by our chief guest, Sri Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Minister of State for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship and Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India. Ladies and gentlemen, so there are going to be two sessions, and of course, as we move forward, we'll gain understanding in the upcoming session on mobilizing higher tax revenues for financing India's development, the importance of raising tax revenues in an equitable manner without impacting the investment attractiveness of India for global investors. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be requesting our distinguished panelists to please now grace the dais. I'd also like to apprise you that Dr. Vijay L. Kelkar, Chairman, India Development Foundation and former Finance Secretary, Government of India, is joining us virtually. And there he is. Please put your hands together and welcome him, ladies and gentlemen. There he is, Dr. Vijay L. Kelkar. Warm welcome to you, sir. Namaskar. Let me now invite our esteemed dignitaries on stage. May I invite Shri Tarun Bajaj, former Secretary, Department of Revenue, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Let's welcome him on stage with a big round of applause. A warm welcome to you, sir. May I invite Dr. R. Kavita Rao, Director, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Let's welcome the lady with a big round of applause. Dr. R. Kavita Rao. Namaskar, ma'am. A very warm welcome to you. I'd like to invite Dr. Alexander D. Clem, Division Chief, Tax Policy 2 Division, Fiscal Affairs Department, International Monetary Fund. Let's welcome Dr. Alexander D. Clem on stage. A very warm welcome to you. May I invite Dr. Sebastian S. James, Senior Economist, Tax Policy, the World Bank Group. Let's welcome Dr. Sebastian S. James, ladies and gentlemen, on stage. A very warm welcome to you, sir. And this session is going to be moderated by Mr. Rajiv Memani, Chairman and Regional Managing Partner, EY India, and Chairman, Global Emerging Markets Committee, Ernst & Young LLP. Let's welcome him on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Rajiv Memani. A very warm welcome to you, sir. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we begin with the session on mobilizing higher tax revenues for financing India's development. It's now over to our moderator. Sir, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much. A very good afternoon to all of you, and it's a real privilege to moderate such a distinguished panel. And whilst I've greeted everyone here, just a very special hello to Dr. Vijay Kelkar. I'm seeing him after a long time. He's a very dear friend of my father, so nice to see you, sir.
Thank you very much.
So I just wanted to set the context for this session. We have, as I said, a very global panel, very distinguished panel, people with very different experiences, and hopefully different points of views as well. Indian economy today, I think all of us will agree, is probably one of the shining spots in the global economy. And a lot of people have taken some predictions on what the numbers will be when India completes 100 years, and as we are calling the next 25 years as the Amrit Kal. And there could be numbers of the size of economy being anywhere from 20 trillion to 25 trillion to some even higher than that of the economy. To reach such a stage in economy, and all of us feel very confident that the economy should do very well, is doing very well. There are some critical enablers for that. And I would say one of the enablers would be that the government expenditure, if we look at the government expenditure as a percentage of GDP around the world for economies of this size or even smaller, India's government expenditure is actually on the lower side. So the government expenditure has to move up, and a lot of that in social areas, whether that is health, education, skilling, and a lot of those areas. The second thing that one would say is the government also has to front end some of the capital expenditure spent. One would also assume that the fiscal deficit numbers, have to come down over a period of time. And if given that India's non-tax revenues have been at a certain level and they're not showing that much buoyancy, a lot of the revenue collection burden is going to go on tax revenues. And if we look at India's tax GDP ratio, I think it's been pretty, you can say, stable, stagnant, whatever is the word one has to use, in the around 17%. Last 2 years has been 17 and a half. This year also, we hope it will be in that 17.5% vicinity. And typically it's been in that kind of ratio. And if I look at the revenue collection, last year we had a tax buoyancy of almost 1.7. Tax revenues were higher by 33-34%. This year also, the anticipation is, based on the interviews that we've been reading, the anticipation is that the tax revenues should be higher by 16 to 17%. So if you look at a nominal GDP growth rate of 14-15%, a tax buoyancy of 1.1 and over that. So what at least on the tax front, the news has been good over the last 2-3 years in the way the tax collection has progressed. And there is always a question of whether the tax GDP ratio of 17% or so, if we compare that with the global average of 33%, some countries in OECD, like France, having almost in the 40s, Germany 38% tax to GDP ratio. But if I look at the Asia Pacific average, it's about 19%. And these countries have a pretty high per capita income. And I'm sure we'll get some stats from Mr. Tarun Bajaj. In India, 90% of the people who file the return of income have income levels of less than 10 lakh rupees. So the per capita income has a strong impact on the tax, what the tax GDP ratio is. So given this view, whether India's tax GDP ratio is adequate, it is not adequate, whether it should be higher. But one thing is very clear, that if India has to achieve the number that they want to achieve, the tax GDP ratio should probably be somewhere around 22-23%. If we do the math on what it is required, I think that's where at least our view is, that that's something that the tax GDP ratio should be. Now, whether it'll move up as per capita income grows up, we know that there are some parts of our economy that are not taxed, primarily being agriculture. There are some pieces where whether some forms of super rich taxation or some taxes which are not there, whether it's wealth tax, estate duty, the impact of that. The revenue, foregone revenue numbers between both direct tax and direct tax, although they have a role that has to be played in moving the economy forward. What is the extent of that? How do we look at new digital taxation as India becomes more and more consumer of digital goods and services? How does that tax revenue that's foregone or lost, how does that play in? So these are some of the things. We have an exceptional panel, and these are some of the things that we will play in. And what I felt was, we can start this session, and I would be requesting each of the speakers, if they could make initial remarks for about 5 minutes or so. And then, once everyone has, completed that, then we'll ask some questions based on the remarks that they have made. I'll take this opportunity, and I would request our former revenue secretary, as rightly said, he was earlier economic affairs, very distinguished stint both in the PMO and Ministry of Finance. And as I had the privilege of dealing and interacting with him, he has been one of the finest officers for the country, and has done a really tremendous job as the revenue secretary, earlier as economic affairs secretary. So congratulations. And with that, I will hand over. If you can start, and then we will move forward.
Rajiv, if you don't mind, can I pass the baton to Dr. Kelkar?
I
Dr.
just thought, yeah.
Kelkar is somebody we have seen him while growing up, and he's been an ideal for all of us.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
think he should be the first one.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I thought once you've made your remarks, he could have some critical remarks on that. So that's why I wanted to let you speak and then make some comments. But I think, like a smart bureaucrat, you've passed the past.
So that's
But for all those people who have had the privilege of knowing Dr. Vijay Kelkar, as was mentioned, he was former finance secretary. He was secretary in the Ministry of MOPNG, and has done some seminal work on public policy, public-private partnerships. Also given the Padma Vibhushan in 2011. But one of the most important things that I remember, first time I heard the word GST was in 2003 in one of the documents that he had released, or under his chairmanship that document was released. So, sir, Dr. Kelkar, over to you, please.
Rajiv, first let me thank you for very, very kind remarks. And I recall meeting you and along with your father, and you were quite indulgent at that time. And I'm especially happy to see my other panelist, particularly Mr. Bajaj, who has been very gracious. But I really feel like Rip Van Winkle here. I don't really know the story of Rip Van Winkle. There's a fellow who goes to a cave and slept for 15 years and suddenly woken up to ask to come back. And we have found the words. In the area, I really feel like Rip Van Winkle, so very kind of you to ask me to come. I'll make 2 or 3 remarks, may not be just to start the ball rolling. First is, I think you're absolutely right that tax GDP ratio in India is not at all bad. I mean, I think it's comparable at that level of income. But in fact, people don't realize it. Some is understated. In fact, in India, our public sector pricing policy really works as a taxation. If you notice, particularly look at our electricity pricing and railway freight pricing, for instance. It's the same taxation. I mean, if you had a market-based prices, the prices would have been much lower, and taxes would have been put on those commodities, the tax would have been collected. So what should have been government's revenue is intermediated by public sector enterprises, the public sector pricing. So my suspicion is that this phenomenon is ubiquitous, both at central government and state governments. So maybe the tax GDP ratio is much more than what really perhaps our official numbers show. So it's not something we should not sort of grudge our performance. I think India has been a very, very sort of careful in our fiscal affairs, and what Tarun and his colleagues have been doing are absolutely exemplary. The way they manage the fiscal space in very turbulent times, my heartiest congratulations to him and his colleagues. So one point is that I think our tax GDP ratio is not something out of way. It's quite consistent with the levels of income, and it's going to grow. So that's one point. Second, and Kavita will correct me, I think it was Professor Bird, very famous Canadian economist, public finance. He always says that developing countries like India, tax policy is tax administration. In other words, he says that it's revolves around your tax administration. And there again, what India has made a number of strides in improving tax administration. I think compliance costs are declining and probably further improved. But I recall, Kavita, that the estimate made by NIPFP, by just introducing a tax instrument network, we increased our tax GDP ratio by 150 basis points. So I think that's a really remarkable done by Department of Revenue and our administration people. So of course, more things can be improved. I'll make only one point and then I'll conclude my remarks. I think the way I see it, the real challenge is going to be making available resources to our third tier urban local bodies and other bodies, because your public goods creation. Now I live in periphery. I don't live in privileged capital of India, and I see this tremendous gap between what is required for the growth requirement of the urban areas that was available. So I think the real challenge is going to look like is urban finance, but that's a point probably we can take up later. So I'll just initial remarks. I'll stop here. But once again, thank you very much. I thank CII. I don't mind telling that since Tarun Das's days, CII was always a favorite of ours in the government as an institution. I am glad that under Chandrakant is continuing to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kelkar. Can I request you and then?
Thank you, Rajiv. I'll just make brief comments of the last 2-3 years as to what has happened, and I think a lot has changed in the Department of Revenue and the revenue administration in the country. So just to recollect that, and then I'll also like to speak a little bit about the tax GDP ratio, which both Dr. Kelkar and Rajiv have spoken about. So first of all, during the COVID time, we really didn't know where we were going, both on the economic side, on the revenue side. But I would say that the Department of Revenue was trying to do certain things at that point of time, and coincidentally, all of them came together. So one of the things that happened at that time was the use of technology and use of technology, AI, extensively, one, to expand the base of the taxpayers and also to ensure better compliance, which was also mentioned by Dr. Kelkar and Rajiv before that. So I think that was one factor which really went into, and the results that have come out are, I think, much more than what we had expected. For example, on the direct taxes front, last year the buoyancy was 2.5. So 49% increase in tax revenue, and the GDP grew by less than 20% in that year. So that was something that I don't think any of the economists or anybody had anticipated, and it was a big thing. But one very important thing that is also something that I need to share with you is that the number of taxpayers didn't go up as much. The number of taxpayers or the people filing their returns went up by almost 2 to 3% only. So the same taxpayers were paying more taxes. So perhaps technology, better compliance was able to help us. The second is simplification of the tax laws. It is happening in bits and pieces in the present code. Maybe the better option would have been if we had done a wholesale rewriting of the code itself. But for example, on the corporate tax rates, in 18, we brought down the corporate tax rate to 22% without any exemptions. So you would be surprised to know that almost 20, 21, 22% of the number of corporates have actually entered the new regime, but 65 to 68% of the income has entered into the new regime. So basically, people have moved into this simplified tax laws, and I think that itself gives more revenue, and the stance of the policymakers then has been vindicated that in the last year, our revenues from corporate tax were the highest, and they are still growing in a very healthy manner. So that was the second aspect that I would say. A lot of work needs to be done on this area. On the personal income tax, it needs to be done. On the capital gains tax, it needs to be done. And there are many other exemptions and things like that which are there in the code which need to be rewritten, so that if the code is made simple, if people are made to pay or their tax rates are brought down, or the slabs are increased, or the width is increased, even if it's a revenue neutral exercise, I would still say in theory it may be a revenue neutral exercise, but in practical terms, when it comes back, I think we'll get greater revenue, because once the tax laws are simplified, there'll be less of litigation and more of tax revenues that will come to us, which has been the case even earlier. We used to have 92% tax rates in the earlier times, which were brought down, and tax revenues actually went up. And the third thing is that on the tax GDP ratio, I'll answer the other questions, maybe I'll exceed. On the tax GDP ratio, I have actually gone through the tax GDP ratio graph, which is presented in the budget every year. And I find in 16-17 and 17-18, for the central taxes, that is the direct taxes and indirect taxes, it was about 11.2. And last year it would have been about 11.6. And the year previous to that, it was about 10.7. So it went up from 10.7 to 11.6, 11.5 in one single year. Now, if you look at it, I feel there is some stability in two taxes in this country, though a lot is being done and needs to be done in those taxes. One is the direct taxes, the corporate and the income tax. As I've already said, something needs to be done. But if you look at the tax buoyancy there, I think we are seeing a good tax buoyancy. As I said, last year it was 2.5. This year also, if we go, it should not be less than 1.7, 1.8. So a buoyancy of 1.7, 1.8 coming over a buoyancy of 2.5. And so there is something which is happening in this system which needs to be looked into, and maybe Kavita should look into it and tell us as to what is happening and what is it that we are doing right and what is it that we need to do more right so that this continues. Similarly, on the GST, if we look at it, last year the growth rate was almost 30%. This year, again, we'll grow between 23 to 25, 22% on GST, which is, again, I would say, a tax that has stabilized in some senses that these are the commodities, this is the way it will be taxed. So the uncertain feature in the tax structure are two structures, which is the excise duty and the customs duty. We actually raise the excise duty or reduce the excise duty. We raise the customs duty or we reduce the customs duty. So there is some kind of ad hocism or there is some kind of reactions to macroeconomic situations or the needs of the country that make us do that. And because of that, the tax GDP ratio changes. So I think academicians should actually look at tax GDP ratio in different buckets for these particular taxes. And then maybe we can come out in a better manner to understand what is happening to the tax GDP ratio of the country. I'll just stop here and maybe during the questions, I'll be happy to answer other questions which Rajiv was asking me outside.
That will be a fun conversation. Uh, thank you very much, Mr. Bajaj. Dr. Kavita Rao, as was introduced, she's a director in NIFPFP and also done a lot of interesting work on tax research, especially I know in the design and implementation of GST, around incentives, around compliances. She's done a lot of work. So, Kavita, if you can make introductory remarks, 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I guess this tax GDP ratio has been bugging all of us for a long time. And the last Finance Commission report again brought it to the fore, and we are all debating on whether we are doing enough, not doing enough, and so on. And what I think we should, as a country, be looking forward to, and I will take the conversation into a completely different direction, is to start asking the question about is there an issue of compliance which we need to deal with beyond what technology helps us do. What I'm trying to ask is, I'll give a little example and then I'll take it forward. I was trying to do a little survey of ordinary taxpayers to figure out what they believe about compliance in the country. And what they believe about expenditures by governments. And the general norm seems to be that everybody believes they are very honest, but there's a large set of people who are not honest. And they also believe that government doesn't spend on what we would like it to spend on. So I think there is a need to have a slightly elongated conversation with the citizen to reframe the relationship between the social contract between the citizen and the state. One issue of concern that I keep thinking about is the perception that a lot of middle class, especially salaried employees in the country put across is that we are a country where the middle class, the salaried people have no choice but to pay tax. Everybody else has a choice and therefore they don't pay too much tax. And we don't get enough from the government for the taxes we pay. So we need to correct this whole perception that a lot of people are not paying tax. And I think one step in that direction also is to make sure we don't change the rates of tax, we don't change the exemption thresholds too often, so that in the bracket creep itself, people will start entering the tax net instead of reducing the number of people who are liable to tax. I will leave it at that, and we can take it further from there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rao. Can I request Alex, if you could make some of your introductory remarks? Alex heads the tax policy division for IMF, Fiscal Affairs Department of IMF, and does a lot of tax analytics work and also a lot of capacity development in Asia, Africa, and also the developed world. So, Alex, good to get a global viewpoint on this subject would be really great.
Yes, of course, with pleasure. So let me start with a difficult statement, which is that, of course, there is no optimal tax ratio that we can figure out around the world. We can talk later about tax gaps and so on and how that is done. But if we talk about optimal tax ratio, there is no answer to it. There is pretty strong empirical evidence that once you go below 12 or 15% of GDP, you will be a fragile country and there's no way out of it. But clearly, once you are beyond that, and India certainly is beyond that, then there is no single answer like that. So the best way to approach this question is maybe to think about, are there potential public projects, either socially or in infrastructure, that are either good for growth or good for reducing inequality, potential projects with very high payoffs that exceed the cost of raising the additional revenue. And the cost of raising the additional revenue, of course, is not just the cost of the revenue you raise, but also any deadweight loss that is unavoidable whenever you have taxation. And most likely the answer to this question is yes. I mean, in India, there's so much need of improving inequality, addressing poverty, boosting growth. So I would assume there are plenty of high return projects that could be funded from additional public resources from higher taxes. Now, if I approach this question now from a really bird's eye view, how can one boost taxes? I think the really basic answer to that is usually it's best to stick to very few taxes and design them extremely well. So instead of having a long list of taxes and excises on this and on that, there should be a very strong GST, a very strong personal and corporate income tax, selected excises wherever you have to deal with externalities, and then maybe a property tax or something like that. And apart from that, better refrain from adding more taxes and instead improve these taxes in terms of how much they raise, but also in terms of how efficient they can be. And maybe as a final remark on this overview here, I would like to mention that at the IMF, jointly with some other institutions, we have recently been developing a new approach which is called medium-term revenue strategy. The idea of this approach is that we help countries design a strategy to raise revenue ratios over a medium term, so not just one budgetary period, but 3 or 4 years, and to tie this directly to some spending increases that they want to do and that are growth increasing or poverty reducing. The idea being is, of course, nobody wants to pay more tax, but it's much easier for people to accept to pay more tax if it's tied at the broad sense to something that is useful to them. And of course, that promise then also has to be kept, and indeed it has to be spent on these useful things. Just to clarify, I don't mean that the tax should be earmarked, go into a separate pot. That would be a pretty bad idea. I meant more politically, it should be tied and it should be linked to these improving spending. Happy to follow up on any of these points, including other points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now pass it on to Dr. Sebastian James. Dr. Sebastian James is a senior economist, tax policy with the World Bank. Again, he's done a lot of work with developing countries around the world in designing their tax systems and also tax policy, tax administration. So over to you, Dr. James. Thank you.
Thank you. So and it's lovely to hear from the distinguished panelists here. It'll be tough to follow up on their act. Let me make a few additional comments. I think, Kavita mentioned something that is quite, I think, pertinent to what I would like to say. And So the question, like Alex mentioned, is there an optimal rate that we should have, we should aim for? And it's very hard to make that case because what is the amount of tax that a country should collect is a political decision. It's the government's decision to decide how much of the private income it should take and then spend. And so it's fundamentally driven by what the priorities of the government are. And you will get a sense by looking at the expenditure. If the fiscal deficit is tending to go high, then you know there is a revenue pressure or there's an expenditure pressure. But is it because of overspending or under collection? This is a very difficult question to answer. But what we could do is we could look at other countries that are like you and see how they do and then compare how you do, right? And in that sense, it would say if you control for level of income, now India is a large country, we have a huge GDP, but our per capita income is quite low. So there is certain limits on what you could essentially tax out of this country. So why would be there only 5% of people filing tax returns? Because a number of Indians do not have adequate income that could be taxable, right? And so if you control for per capita income, India actually does not bad. It would be right on average. And is average good? That's something we should decide. We should agree on. We can debate on. On overall revenue, we are right on average. On VAT, we actually collect more than average. On income tax, we collect right on average. Excises on average. Trade taxes, customs duties, we do less, but the whole idea of customs duty has changed. In the past, it used to be fundamentally a revenue collecting mechanism. Nowadays, it's more used for different purposes. It's mostly used as a means to manage certain external events. And then you also have property taxes. Actually, we do quite well. If you look at it, if you add up all the, and so the other thing is that keep in mind when we look at all our data, we typically get central government data, but the states collect a lot of GST. These states collect a lot of VAT. So when you add them all together, actually we do quite well on the indirect taxes on that side. So the question is like, should we collect more? And yes, I think there is scope for collecting more, especially on income taxes. What should we do? And Kavita mentioned, only 5% of our people pay income tax. She talked about bracket creep. The question is, why is it possible that only 5% of people have taxable income? Is it possible that there are many people who have taxable income but not filing tax returns, who are understating their incomes? Okay, so there is and the reason we may wonder why this might be the case, and there is also it's like you mentioned, am I getting something back from the tax system for which I should pay taxes? And that is the tax morale issue. And that's the question which everybody would ask. If you have an option not to pay, I would rather not pay because I'm not getting anything out of it. So one thing I think, when I think about India's tax system of the future and looking at other countries, their tax systems, I think what we are missing would be adding to the list that Alex just mentioned, I would say social contributions, a social security tax. Essentially what happens in most of these countries is so we do have an old age pension, but it's paid out of the general budget. It's a very small amount of pension. But what we could do is collect a social security tax that goes into your individual accounts. And it starts from zero. It starts from, if you earn 1 rupee, you collect a small percentage of it. It could be 5%. But what happens is that goes into your individual accounts, and when you retire, you get a pension. And so it's a funded pension system paid out of your tax money that you paid all through your life. And what happens is people say, okay, I'm going to get something out of it. When I retire, I don't need to worry. I'm going to depend on, my savings and other things. Well, it's great to have savings, but I don't need to worry that I'll not have any money when I retire. Right? So that's and also for my health expenses. So that is one thing I think we could think about having second thing is that we have right now we are on the positive side, on the demographic side, right? We have a demographic dividend. We have a lot of young people than old people. Now these young people will become old one day. So we need to think about what will they do when they grow old. So the idea is that we need to prepare now. So if we could start this, and then because it starts with 1 rupee, anybody who has any amount of any wages would be contributing to their account. And interestingly, we have our PAN number as a permanent account number. It's an account number. Essentially, it could be into your own PAN, right? And that account number, you can actually see your money accumulating over your lifetime. It's been because it's funded out of your incomes throughout your lifestyle. So it's something we can think about in the future. And on the third point, there's only so much tax can do, because for what is tax? It's a collection of some amounts of money from economic activity. So fundamentally, it's economic activity that drives the taxes, and we need to understand what can we do about increasing economic activity. And one thing that is troubling for India is that we are ranked on 85 on the transparency index on corruption. So it is a fact that corrupt countries tend to have stunted growth. So we need to deal with that issue. When we tackle corruption, when our regulatory systems are freer, when our systems, our business decisions are taken purely by business need, when businesses don't need to worry about doing economic activity, this actually makes the system move smoothly. And this creates great impetus to growth. And so we need to tackle the non-tax issues. This is an elephant in the room. We need to go from rank 85 to rank 20 or below. That should be our goal, right? And there are some good moves, at least in certain areas that we are doing, and I wish we could do better on that. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it'll be what I'll do now is we'll probably have a few questions, and also I'll start with you, Mr. Bajaj, and maybe a response on the social security tax, NPS, PPF, PF, whatever, if, whatever is India's, whatever we are doing. But I think one thing is very clear, that there is no from the panel discussion, there's no right percentage of what the tax GDP ratio is. But at the same time, with India's fiscal deficit that we have, and also the social needs that the government has, clearly the tax revenues as a percentage have to go up. And I think none of us will say that India is a low taxed or moderately taxed country. I think we are, as per what we heard from Dr. James as well, that I think it is a probably highly taxed country. Maybe there are some pockets that are not taxed as much, and maybe compliance is a bit of an issue. But it'll be good to get your views on what do you think can be done or should be done to raise the tax revenues in India without necessarily tinkering with more taxes or moderate or changing tax rates.
So before I start, and lest somebody should take another message, I would say there is no need to raise tax rates. So that is the first part that I'd like to say before I come up with some answers to James. So one of the things that I want to throw some statistics at you. There are a little more than 11 crore people who paid some kind of tax. It could be a TDS, it could be a TCS, it could be an annual return, self-assessment, or advanced tax or TDS. Can you, now out of these 11 crore odd people who pay taxes to us, and this data is dated about 2 years ago, only 7 crore file returns. The remaining 4 crores don't file returns. Now, I don't say that all 4 crores are bound to file returns, because I may have done a one-odd transaction on which you have deducted TDS. I'm happy with that. I am less than the minimum income on which tax starts. So I'm not filing a return. I'm not mandated to file a return, so it's fine. But I would say that the audience here and all of you would agree that saying that 4 crore people who pay taxes in some form do not file returns is something that we can be comfortable with. I don't think as an administrator, having worked in the government, I'll be very comfortable that these 4 crore people who are not filing returns and not showing their incomes properly is something that can be a matter of comfort for us. So that is the first part of it. The second part of it is that we are now in the process of formalizing our economy more and more. The more we are formalizing our economy, the more the income tax and the GST is getting connected to the MCA data, it is getting connected. we find that corporates generally have been paying taxes and are paying taxes. There may be some evasion there. I don't say that there won't be any evasion there, but yes. But now let us look at the salaried class. As somebody here said, that the salaried class is the one that feels that we pay taxes and the others don't pay taxes. So when we looked at data, we found that non-corporate only salaried class returns on an average were paying taxes of about 75,000 to 80,000 rupees per return, which was being filed. The non-corporate, non-salaried were only paying 39,000 rupees per return. Now, as has been said here, maybe they have a perception that the government is not spending money properly, that they don't need to pay taxes. But I would say that there is more to it than this simple argument that because the government doesn't spend in the manner that I want it to spend, that's why I'll not pay taxes. Or is it the way that I will not pay taxes? That is why I will say that the government is not spending its money properly. We may be somewhere in the middle, but this is a problem which is there. Now, what has happened is last year, our portal did not function properly, and a train doesn't reach in time, meets an accident, makes big news. It made big news. There was another train which is called the AIS, Annual Information System, by which we were collecting data on taxpayers on their investments, on their incomes, on their property purchase, on their property sale. That also was rolled out at the same time that that portal was rolled out. And that gave us a lot of information, and we threw that information to the taxpayer, and the taxpayer was then supposed to look at it and pay his taxes. And that is why I'll again emphasize the point that with the same taxpayers, we got much more taxes. And if I look at the taxes this year, in the personal income tax space, the tax that is coming is, in terms of percentage growth, is far better than the corporate tax growth. So basically, it signifies statistically, perhaps, that there was some evasion, and that is actually coming out. Now, what are we doing on this? Or what is it that we can do? What is what Rajiv was asking? So the whole idea is that you throw this data. A lot of chartered accountants, not knowing me at the time of filing returns, sent me messages that people here have no incomes till you see their AIS. And once we saw their AIS and we told them that you'll have to file taxes on these, they said, no, we have already given TDS. So they were explained that TDS is not taxes. You have to pay taxes by filing returns. So now notices have started going wherever there is a mismatch between what was shown in the AIS and what is the return that you filed, or what is the tax you have not filed. So once that is going on, then people have the option of filing updated returns. Let me tell you, there are about 5 lakh updated returns that must have come by now. When I left, the figure was a little lower than that. These updated returns are people who want to correct their return which they had filed. And almost 300 to 400 crores of rupees have come. And out of this, 22,000 returns are corporate returns that have come, which people are filing as updated returns because some kind of income they had not actually truly mentioned in their returns, which they want to file now. So I think once we are able to, and the third thing that we are trying to do is that I find that the government cannot reach out to the taxpayer asking them pay taxes. The government cannot go to their house and say pay taxes. So we have to create a situation by which they start paying taxes. So what do? People who have not filed returns, and now not only based on your income, but on certain other matters, if you've had a foreign trip, if you have had so much of cash dealings in your accounts. So there are some other criteria also, based on which if you are supposed to file a return, and if you don't file a return, then your TDS doubles. Maybe there's a requirement that after 2 years, this TDS should triple, or there should be a lien on their accounts or in their principal amount, so that people will start paying taxes. So I think if we take these measures, and if the number of people who are filing, if we can expand the base of the pyramid, I think we would be doing greater justice to the tax system in this country, rather than just saying that I need to bring more taxes in the form of wealth tax, estate duty, or increase the taxes on the richer people, because that will only put the burden on a few people. If these 7 crore people I can say that for sure. I've actually seen that through statistics, that if today anybody getting an income of 6.5 to 7 lakhs doesn't have to pay taxes at all. If this is increased to 9 lakhs, maybe more people will start showing income of 9 lakhs. Even the 7 crore people that I was saying who file returns, 75% of the people file return only up to 5 lakhs of income. So they pay zilch tax, they pay zero tax. And as Rajiv was saying, 90% of the people pay taxes on income which is less than 10 lakhs. So I think if we can broaden this, if we can bring these people into the tax net by nudging, by ensuring through technology, by reaching out to them through information, data that we have on them, and fourthly, through the process of TDS and TCS, that we collect the taxes through transaction methods so that people will start coming and filing returns. I think we would also achieve more people paying taxes, and also tax to GDP ratio could also go up. One small statistics, and I'll close there. On the GST, I want to say this again, statistics throwing at you, that there were 70 lakh people who were paying VAT before GST came into being 5 years ago. Today, that number is 1.4 crores. So once you formalize, once you get people into the system, they will start paying taxes. And once they start paying taxes, and last year, the growth that we have seen in GST from 1 lakh to about 140 now, which is the norm, is not because too much on account of the change of tax rates, but only because of these compliances, of these formalization that has happened in the economy.
Thank you very much. I think if I have to summarize, the substantive point really is how do we use technology more and more to increase the tax base and improve the levels of compliance rather than adding to any tax or changing, moderating any rates. Dr. Kavita Rao, I have one question, and I think this is something I have. I mean, you did mention that one of the ways of nudging people is also to have a better contract, or government explaining the rationale of what's happening with that money. But I do feel, and the ease of doing business, and that issue was also raised. And this entire amount of tax disputes and tax litigation that happens. Today we have almost probably close to 11 trillion rupees that's locked in tax disputes. And Mr. Bajaj knows this is one of my favorite subjects, and I've raised it with him many times. But I do feel that as a country, we probably need to do a better job of how we actually tackle with them. So I'm sure you have done a lot of research on this. It will be good to get your perspective. If you have any comments on what the others have said, and also, I think apart from improving the compliance, I think there is something that how we deal with litigation and tax disputes is something that can also help in improving tax revenues and tax compliance overall.
Um, I'll make a quick point on the social security contributions issue before I. There are, I guess, a number of schemes now in India in operation which do a variant of what you are suggesting. What it effectively means is part one, does that money accrue to the government to do what it chooses with it, and therefore becomes a part of the tax. That brings you also to the question of when you have an aging population, how will you pay back what you're collecting by way of social security, which is the challenge a lot of developed countries are now facing, because they collected social security and now they have to pay out, and they have a very young, small youth. So I think counting it as tax today, I attempted the exercise, but it's very difficult to pull all of that information together. You would perhaps find a much higher tax to GDP ratio for India just by the sheer fact that you would add all the pension contributions, although they are mandatory pension contributions. So that is a numerical exercise. It doesn't change fundamentally what revenues the government has access to. So that is a question that I'm not sure India is heading down that path as a way of raising more revenues. Turning to the question, sir, you raised, I personally haven't done too much work on litigation. My colleagues, although have done some work on litigation, and the conclusions seem to be somewhat mixed, and therefore I will not roll them all out. The idea seems to be, however, that on the one side, people want a perception of stability in the tax system so that they have less contentious issues to deal with continuously. And but on the other hand, we want a nimble government which comes ahead and addresses every single concern that we have. So this is a peculiar trade-off that all citizens are asking of the government, where we want quick answers to anything that bothers us, but at the same time, we want a stable tax regime. And recently, I was talking to somebody from the petroleum sector, and they were talking about the tax, the windfall tax. Said, this is unfair. I said, but you had a windfall, right? So what's the question? So the question then seems to be that, we would like to know going forward, can we institutionalize it so that it becomes predictable? So in times of uncertainty, we get a tax or a levy. Can we institutionalize it that going forward it becomes predictable? Which is an interesting way of putting it. So I guess the challenge is to ensure more stability. We try talking about simplicity, but I'm not convinced in income tax you can have a simple tax. GST, yes, but in income tax, a simple tax by definition is an oxymoron. And so we should attempt to simplify, but I think we have challenges down the path. Each time we try to simplify, we'll perhaps have more contentious litigations coming up. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I will, as we go around, I mean, if anyone has any comments on this, but I do believe that it is a massive issue for ease of doing business in India. And, given the role that we have of dealing with both government and business, I think there are both sides to it, but I think there is a clear need that needs to be, otherwise India will not be able to achieve neither its full business potential nor its full revenue potential. Alex, I just wanted to touch base on this entire digital economy. Historically, the way tax systems have been legislated, the producer of goods generally is the place where taxes are being paid. And OECD has always had a bias towards that, and I think there is a good, healthy debate right now that's going on. India has brought its own way of how they want to deal with something like that. But in the digital world, as the consumption of services goes, as there is more cross-border movement, what is the perspective on consumption based? I mean, there is obviously GST and indirect tax, but how do you tax income that is generated by global organizations, global companies, which is digitally transferred and consumed largely, I would say, in a lot of the large economies, large populations, emerging economies, who are consuming a lot of this. But taxes mostly accrue either in Ireland or some other matured market or some other place. So it'll be good to get your thoughts and perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you for this good question. So I think digitalization really is just an example where the issue that you raised, that maybe a lot of the value creation actually is in the place of consumption, where it is most visible, most starkly visible, but it's actually not only in the case of digitalization. We see this with other goods too. If you sell a normal good, like say medicine, the value of this medicine will be different in different markets, and that's because the demand is different in different markets. So abstracting from digitalization already, one could make the case for linking taxation not only with the place of production, but also with the place of consumption. Now, we could go into the pure theory and come out with really very innovative and revolutionary ideas like taxing only based on the place of consumption, and we come up with things like destination-based cash flow taxes, which in theory work beautifully, but in practice they're not on anybody's agenda. But we can also be a bit more modest, and if we are more modest, we end up with things like either digital service taxes, and I know in India there is this equalization levy, or actually 2 equalization levies, but we don't need to go into the details here. So they are an attempt to address this in one specific sector, but it's a problem that is actually not restricted to one sector. So therefore, it is an attempt to solve a problem, but unfortunately, it's kind of a ring-faced attempt to do this. And the latest development of this is now this proposal at the inclusive framework for BEPS. They have come up with an idea. It's all a bit confusing because they use lots of terms. Like in this case, it's called Pillar 1. It's actually called Amount A of Pillar 1. But for anybody who doesn't want to delve into these details, all you need to know is that there is this idea that for the largest multinationals on earth, one would take their global profits and calculate a part of that profit that we might call excess profit, specifically profits that exceed 10% of sales, and allocate a share of these profits to the country of final consumption to be taxed there. And this is not restricted to digital companies. It's all companies except for the financial sector and for the extractive industries. This reform has in principle been agreed by 141 countries last October 2021. It has not yet been implemented. But this is something that is important to know. In principle, 141 countries are committed to implementing this, and it would address this. But having now talked about how this works in theory, to make it more practical, you also asked about the revenue impact of all of that. And there, I have to say that the revenue impact is negligible. And that is true both of unilateral digital service taxes, including the one in India, but also what we have seen in many other countries. The revenues of these things, they are negligible. If we want to express it in percent of GDP, we talk about 0.01, 0.02, nothing more. So they might be important for cohesion of the system, but they actually do not raise very much. And the same is true of this Pillar 1 that I have just described. It would not raise very much. But of course, it would have the advantage that it would be the same approach all over the world, or let's say at least 141 countries, including India, rather than each country doing their own thing, which would make it much more complex for businesses. So to sum up, I think these are great approaches addressing a problem that is very stark in the digital sector, but actually occurs also outside the digital sector. But anybody who believes that this would resolve a revenue challenge is mistaken. It's not going to raise a lot. It's going to be, a small but positive revenue impact. Happy to follow up.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think the only difference was in physical goods. We can go through the technicalities of what permanent establishment and how they work. And in a digital world, I think that's not required. But this is not a tax session, so I won't go there. Is Dr. Kelkar there? And
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Can we move the? Dr. Kelkar, Mr. Bajaj was mentioning that amongst the 3 taxes that are working most efficiently in India, corporate tax, personal tax, and GST. So I thought it'll be good to get your perspective, and especially in the context that do you think, states are obviously asking for greater share in revenues. They're asking for a greater share in the GST pie as the cess period goes away. And also, do you think states are missing an opportunity to look at additional sources of revenue? It could be stamp duties, could be others as well. So it'll be good to get your perspective on that.
Thank you. Rajiv, can you hear me?
Your voice is not that audible. I think we'll have to raise the volume.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now it's better. Yeah.
So Rajiv, before I answer that, let me respond to the earlier question about litigations. I think one way, and maybe Tarun may have already done it, one way, like when Moilid Saab was a law minister, he tried to sort of get an exit policy accepted, which means at what level the government will not challenge the decision of the adjudicating authority. So no appeals. So no appeals exit. And that way, I think you can reduce enormously the delays if this is implemented quite rigorously. You perhaps can reduce the delays, but I just leave it at that. I think I'm afraid, Raju, as I mentioned earlier, I live now not in Delhi but in Pune, and I do feel that the states, rather than states, is really the local bodies and corporations have much greater need for access to tax revenue. And what we now need to do, and I've been arguing that I restate that position, that we have to now make a third tier as a one more consolidated fund of third tier, and we must start sharing the GST revenue with all the three arms of the government, center, state, and local bodies. Because all the local public goods, the demand is increasing, urbanization is taking place, and let me tell you, India is going to leave cities more and more in the coming years. So unless we improve the local public goods in the third tier, we'll have a lot of problems with the growth itself. So we require, I'll just put we may require amend Article number 266 for the Constitution, which creates a concerned fund of, today we are concerned fund of India, concerned fund of states. We have to create concerned fund for third tier. And also amend Article 243 and ensure that the share of this goes directly to the third body. So in my view, rather than increasing state share, we have to really increase the share of the third level by, we had a 73rd, 74th amendment by which you can have a transfer of funds, functions, and functionaries. And that will improve the governance and the supply for public goods. So I'm not very sympathetic with state asking more. I think it really should go to sharing. For instance, I'm just thinking aloud. Suppose I'm a 1 point idea man. By my idea is a single GST rate. But suppose you accept my suggestion of single GST rate of 12% to start with. 5% go to center, 5% go to state, and 2% goes to state government, to local bodies. So corporations, municipalities, elected bodies will also get access to funds. So this way, actually, the state plus the local bodies share will go more than 50%. But I don't want to give more to state because they don't pass on. Today, they did not pass on, and all this third level government is suffering. Yes, there should be more devolution, but not to the states, but to the local bodies and corporations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll pass it on to Mr. Bajaj to say, why can't we just have one rate of GST tax, as Dr. Kelkar and many others have been advocating, or at least a simplified version as compared to what we have today.
So if you permit, on the litigation front, since that is something you have also discussed with me a number of times, the first of thing that I want to acknowledge is that this is a problem. And today the problem is that at the lowest level, which is the commissioners of appeals, they have about more than 4 lakh cases with them, and they are able to dispose of about 1 lakh cases every year. So this itself has become a problem, but I think some steps have been taken, and if we can actually do that, maybe litigation can come down. One thing for which the government can very rightfully take credit is that we did away with the retrospective taxation. So that took away 1,11,000 crores in one stroke of that legislation. So that was out of that, whatever number you're saying. The second thing which came up in the last budget was that if a case in a point is lying with the High Court or the Supreme Court, then if a similar point arises in the present assessment, that will not go for litigation if the assessee agrees that he'll abide by the decision of the High Court or the Supreme Court. So I think that has also a potential to reduce the tax liability, because other than the other tax disputes that we have, there would be about 24 issues that are lying in various courts that are required to be settled for these cases to go down. Now what happens is that there is a particular issue which is there, So this year on the assessment, I raised that assessment. The assessee goes to the court. Next year, the same issue again comes. Again, I do that. And again, he goes to the court. So it only increases the litigation. So some attempt has been made in the last budget. And I think government is maybe thinking of actually improving on that and ensuring that less litigation takes place. The third is that instead of a person assessing the returns now it is a group assessment where 2 or 3 people in the faceless scheme will actually look at each assessment order and then make an order. One hopes that in the times to come, the quality of the assessment orders should improve and we would have lesser number of litigation. The other things which are being tried are the dispute resolution committee. I'll agree with Rajiv on that. He's told me that that has not actually started functioning well, but I think now the government has actually issued its guidelines, and this year we should see some of it actually function. So it will reduce, but nevertheless, I accept this point that there is an issue, and I'm very happy that the Supreme Court has also decided that 2 days in a week they will devote to tax litigation. So there is a process also which we have tried to do in the Supreme Court is the bunching of cases. Similar cases are now being bunched together, and once that decision comes, then the litigation on that matter will go down. But yes, the litigation is something that needs to be taken care of. The second issue, Alex, on the Beps, since I was involved in that, I have one great grievance which I can say that I'm out of the government. It is only when the West gets hurt that it's a problem. Otherwise, it is never a problem. Otherwise, we were criticized for Vodafone, we were criticized for Kane. But now, because the taxes are going to Cayman Islands, the taxes are going to Ireland, and the West, Europe and the West is suffering. So this has become a major issue. And if my prediction goes right, the Pillar 2 will actually get implemented much faster than Pillar 1. Pillar 1 will be a contentious issue. And even on that, 141 countries may have signed it. But if you ask the heart of those 141 countries, not even 41 countries' heart will be on the resolution that has come up. So the resolution that comes up there is something very different. So I would say, one, it's only 20 billion euros and above companies. It is only 10% more than 10% of profits, and there also only 25% of the profits will be shared. So the negotiation is an unequal negotiation that takes place. I can say that now that I'm outside the government. So even that decision you will see, I'm sure in the next CIA conference, if not here, I'll sit there and see whether BEPS has reached any conclusion or not. It'll be a very difficult conclusion. A lot of countries need their legislature to actually pass this, and I can say that I see a lot of difficulty in them actually passing this. And I agree with you. The revenues may not be very large today, but the potential of these revenues may be very large in the years to come. Because this 20 billion is supposed to come down to 10 billion after a certain number of years. The companies will keep expanding, they'll keep growing, and that is how the revenues will grow. Your third point was, sorry, I'm taking... GST. On GST, we had a small discussion, Dr. Kelkar, inside the room, which went a little hot. So I think Rajiv is taking advantage of that, and he wants to bring the same heat in this conversation. I was telling him, in this country, we could not decide on textiles whether we can remove the inverted duty or not. Because the traders wanted the inverted duty to continue, the manufacturer wanted the inverted duty to go away. And there was so much of noise in the outside, and Dr. Kelkar, no better person than you to understand that in this country, economic policy is not only economic policy, it is politico-economic policy. So you also have to take the politics side of that also into account. So I see very difficult today that you will tax atta or pre-packaged products like dahi at the same rate at which you will do the cars, the luxury cars, the aerated drinks, the cigarettes. So we need to have, maybe the number of rates need to come down. I'm a votary saying that 5, 12 and 18 need to be brought down to 2 rates. But whether they can be brought down to 1 rate at this point of time, I am not too sure. And the gold, which is at 3%, if I'm not mistaken, if I take it to 12%, you will see even I will go maybe to the market, or you will go to the market and say that I want to pay in cash. So that is how the present situation in the country is. I think we will need some time. At this point of time, we should take some baby steps to reach to that optimal solution and not try to reach that optimal solution straight away. Sometimes we have a desire to go from 0 to 100 straight away, and we are not happy to go to 60. I would say let's try 0, 10, 20, 40, and then reach the optimal level that we want to reach. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments on this from anyone? Or yeah, yeah.
Dr. Kelkal mentioned about how do we fund local governments? Is there a good way to do it? If you look at, like in many Western countries, local governments do have, for example, in the current structure, the GST that you have, they could piggyback on the existing GST. So the local government could add 1 or 2 percentage points to the current GST and use that money for their local, for funding local goods. So if you look at the way our local bodies are funded, you find that relatively they're very underfunded. They depend a lot on state governments to send money to them. And that turns out to be quite a weakness for funding of local public goods. Even the amount of property tax they collect is not as much as we should. I think ideally we should collect a lot more property tax than we do. So if you give them more tax bases at the local government, property tax, and if you allow them to take a piggyback on the GST, some countries even allow an income tax at the local level. So of course we don't even have income tax at the state level, but there are countries that even have income tax at the local level. So the same structure, you allow an extra rate to be imposed on the current system. So you don't create new rates, a new tax. It's an existing tax, but allow yourself to piggyback on that. And I know what Kavita mentioned, is the social security contributions a tax or not? It's kind of a tax if you do have some top up into a very low, for example, if you are paying into your social security all through your life, but at the end, the amount that you're coming out is below what you would say living wage, living expenses, then there could be some top up on that. So in that sense, it's a guaranteed income for people when they retire. And the second point is we do have a provident fund schemes, but that's largely in the formal sector. We need to have a structure that works for almost everybody in the country. Everybody in the country, when they grow old, they should have the security that they will be able to have some money that they can survive on, right? And so that's the idea as to how do we create a tax structure that can support that kind of thing, where when you grow old, you are sure that at least you'll be getting a 10,000 or 5,000 rupees. In fact, in Kerala, they have like a 10,000 rupee. There's a party that was formed on this issue, saying that everybody should get 10,000 rupees a month. Everybody in the country, at the very least, because that will guarantee that they can have a decent standard of living, and they form a party around it. But Kerala has a number of parties, so this is just an example. But in the future, this is going to be a demand that they could share. Everybody should have a basic minimum amount to survive. How do we fund it? And this was one of the suggestions I had, because most countries do have a social security contributions. So that's something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rajiv, I'm speaking a lot, but Dr. Kelkar wants to come.
Yeah, Rajiv, can I?
Yeah.
No, I just want to mention that beauty of third-tier sharing GST is extremely incentive compatible. In other words, it will improve both supply and demand for better governance. Because now every citizen of that place becomes a stakeholder. He sees that he's paying the taxes, he'll demand for better governance. The flip side is that the city authorities, larger tax base, they're better off. So we find tremendous incentive compatibility of this tax, but both supply side and demand side of governance. So I think there is some merit in considering this proposal.
Dr. Kelkar, I just want to respond to this thing of yours where you're saying that there should be a sharing between the center state and the local bodies. I would say that the pie is the same. If you look at the last Finance Commission, also the Finance Commission has given a lot of local body grants to the local bodies straight from the center itself. The money is going straight to the local bodies rather than going through the states. So as soon as you bring in something like that, we would soon notice that that particular tap would immediately close down. So whether this will be an addition to that or it will not be an addition to that is a major point to be noted, because generally what happens is that once they have a separate tap, the already taps which are running would get stopped. The second thing which I think the Finance Commission has done, and in a small way it has started happening, is that they have now said that this money will go to the local bodies depending on the reforms that they do. So one of the reforms on the property taxes is that the property taxes have to now go up at the same rate at which the CPI, I think, if I'm not GSDP growth, sorry. It is the GSDP growth rate that it has to. So this is a big step, I would say, in terms of reform. So if the local bodies want that money, they should increase the property taxes and collect those property taxes.
Better compliance on property.
Yeah. So that is another factor that needs to be taken. But I think it's a very complicated issue, and like the states keep accusing the center that they levy cess and don't share it with us. If you ask the local bodies, they have much lesser voice. They say the same thing about the states. So I think your point is valid, but we have to find an optimal solution, because the tax revenues, we can take it as the same kitty. So we have to distribute from the same kitty to these three organizations, and how do we do it, and what is the best way to do it?
Thank you. We need to now close in 5 minutes, so I would request for closing comments. I just wanted to summarize the session. One of the exam questions we had was, is India's tax GDP ratio right? The percentage is right. To achieve India's potential, the government certainly needs more revenues. Are there avenues without impacting economy and business through which more revenues can be collected? And at least what I heard was, I think the biggest silver bullet that India has is to enhance compliance so that everyone who's supposed to pay tax is actually paying their tax. I just wanted to address one issue. If we could get just 1 minute to 2 minutes response from each of you. We didn't. Most people agreed that we probably don't need additional taxes or super rich tax, wealth tax, estate duty at this stage. But is there any base erosion that we should be looking at, whether it is in terms of incentives, whether it's in terms of some parts of income, agricultural income, some parts of taxation in the way they are taxed, capital gains tax or anything, where we can enhance the revenue base of the country. So I'll just, maybe Alex from that side, if we can start and get your feedback. I know this is a more local issue, it's less global issue, but any comments would be very useful.
Yes, of course. I mean, you say it's a local issue, but actually many of these issues, they are quite similar across the world. And a topic that is very common across the world is the under-taxation of capital gains compared to other types of capital income, which has the consequence that people prefer to collect capital gains. You can look at the US, the super rich, they have a disproportionate share of their income in terms of capital gains, which is not taxed until realized, so they don't realize it for a long time, and so on. So these are common issues. And if you allow me, I mean, the other point I wanted to make is that really we talk here about the level of taxation, but we should never forget the importance of the quality of taxation, right? We can raise revenues through many bad ways, not just nuisance taxes, but also good taxes that are badly implemented. VAT, we discussed already the multiple rate structure, so I'm not going to repeat that. But there is the other way to raise more money from VAT, which is not to pay refunds. Again, a very common thing around the world. It does raise revenues, but in a very harmful and bad way. And that's not the way to go. I could give you more examples, but probably I should not. Maybe I should just very quickly talk about the wealth tax, because you mentioned it before. I think what many people think is a wealth tax that must be progressive because it's a tax on wealth, and the wealthy have lots of wealth. But actually, if you compare a wealth tax to a tax on capital income, actually the wealth tax is regressive, because the wealth tax is assuming that there is some constant rate of return on wealth, but it's not. So people who are very good at investing their wealth and make very, very high return, they actually like wealth taxes because it's a fixed percentage of their wealth. While if they had to pay capital income tax on their true capital income, they would pay much more tax. And on that, I think I have overused my minutes, so thanks a lot and let me stop.
We did do some work a long time ago on whether agriculture should be brought under tax. And I think the contentious issue is not so much whether there are too many poor people and therefore we should not bring in agriculture, but the fact that most poor people will not be liable to tax and therefore we should bring it in. The challenge is it lies in the domain of the states. So if the states and the center can come to a grand bargain a la GST, that I think is an interesting space to explore in the times to come, especially if we want agriculture also to become more, get more investment and move forward. I think that will be one space I would look to.
I'll take much less time. I agree both with Alex and Dr. Rao on this front. So on the agriculture also, I think it's a good thought because it also leads to a lot of evasion of tax through that means. So basically, I don't know, the way I have understood tax is that if I make money, I should pay taxes. And if I make more money than the threshold, I should pay my taxes. So whether I make it through capital gains, I make it through business income, salaried income, or anything else.
Yeah, two things. One is I was very very interested that we should tax agricultural income. This is definitely I feel a hole in our tax policy because why are other incomes taxed but not agriculture income? But after I did the calculation, I'm not convinced because the tax from agriculture is very, very low because it's a highly risky investment. You notice, do farmers in their, they're very highly volatile, especially after climate change. You have droughts, you have floods. The actual income you get out of them is really limited, right? So if you allow truly carry forward of losses for agriculture, believe me, you'll get very little revenue. That's the calculation I did. A second calculation I did was on the billionaire tax. So if you go to Forbes.com, you can download the wealth of all the billionaires. I applied a 2% tax on that, and we're getting 1% or 2%, more than 1% of GDP of revenue by applying a 2% tax rate on the wealth of billionaires. So I'm sure they can afford it, and I'm very sure it will improve our direct tax to GDP, direct tax to our total tax ratio, and I think we should seriously consider it. I'll stop there.
Dr. Kelkar, we started with you, so we can have the final word. Your voice is not clear, Doctor.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now it's better.
Yeah. No, one point not mentioned so far, so I'll just flag it. I think we have to also start thinking of eco-taxes, essentially for the better environment. There are lots of negative outputs have been created and we don't have adequate regime yet for eco-taxes. So I start thinking about it, how should be done, what level it should be exercised. But it's a very interesting issue, and I think sooner we start thinking about it, we are probably better off. On agriculture income tax, I think only way it may succeed, as Kavita said, if central government works as an agent of the states. In other words, collected money will go back to the state government, not like the central government. Then we may find state government may be forthcoming, that central government becomes the agent, because it has the data, it has and whatever the income tax collected on agriculture at a certain level goes back direct 100% to the state government. Then we may find some traction in this. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all my fellow panelists for a very interesting session, and thank you everybody. We'll close now. Thank you very much. So you have a question? Huh.
Thank you, Mr. Bajaj. You raised the issue of textiles. I've taken it up with you. I'm Kapoor from the Association of Synthetic Fiber Industry. There is a skewed GST structure in the case of to the detriment of the man-made fiber industry. We pay 5% the textiles at the fabric stage, whereas it is 12%. You almost level, equal at 10%, but still you said probably political, whatever issue it is. But will it be carried on to the perpetuity? Because this man-made fiber industry is suffering. Our capacity utilization is just 65%. Globally, 110 million tons of textile fiber was used last year, out of which cotton has been 25 million tons. It can go to 24, 26, 27, but not more than that. And the balance comes from so-called man-made fibers. They're synthetic fibers, actually, and 90% of which is polyester. If this policy continues, I don't think we'll have man-made fibers in this country. Where will the clothing come from? Probably we go back to Adam and Eve days. So I think this should be resolved at the earliest.
I couldn't agree more with you. And I would say CII is sitting here. CII should take it up. I think that time I felt, I have said this in another forum, I felt very alone there. I felt very isolated there, that nobody was speaking out. The problem today is, which is very true, CII also represents various interests. So I'm sorry I'm taking the name of CII. It's true for all bodies. So it's very difficult. So it's our job to do it. We tried our best. But I hope, Mr. Kapoor, that inshallah, it should happen. It will happen. We have, in fact, in the last two GST Council meetings, we have reversed the inverted duty on a lot of items. So I think there's hope for textile. Textile is a big industry for us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
My sincere thanks to our esteemed panel of experts for their valuable time and sharing their enriching views, and Mr. Memani for bringing out a highly engaging and fruitful discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, our next session on technology and Atmanirbhar India will commence at 5:30 p.m. in Regal Room on the first floor. This session will be an in-person session during which we will have Mr. Uday Kotak, Chairman, CII Global Economic Policy Summit, and past President, CII and Managing Director and CEO, Kotak Mahindra Bank, in conversation with Shri Ashwini Vaishnav, Minister for Railways, Communications, Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, who is again joining us in person. Ladies and gentlemen, request you all to kindly proceed towards the Regal Room on the first floor for the session, please. Thank you so very much.